They left me, their only daughter, in the intensive care unit, fighting for my life, so they could attend my brother's glamorous gala. They did it without a second thought, without a single tear. But what they didn't know was that the doctors and nurses saw everything, and they were about to do the unthinkable, testify against my own family in a court of law. My name is Sarah Miller. I'm 38 years old, and until a few months ago, I was always just Nurse Sarah, the reliable one, the one everyone leaned on, the one who always put the needs of others before her own. I dedicated my life to caring for patients in the ICU, witnessing the fragile line between life and death every single day. But I never imagined I would be the one lying in that hospital bed, watching my own family cross a different kind of line, one that no child should ever have to witness. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Before I tell you the rest of this life-altering story, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real stories about family betrayal and the strength it takes to overcome it, which might just change how you see your own relationships. My life, before the storm hit, was a long, quiet rhythm of service. As an ICU nurse at St. Jude's Hospital, my job demanded a unique blend of patience, compassion, and steel. My shifts were grueling 12-hour marathons, but I loved it. I loved the feeling of pulling someone back from the brink, of comforting a terrified family, of bringing a small measure of peace to a room filled with pain. I lived in a small but cozy apartment on the outskirts of the city, close enough for the commute but far enough to escape the noise. It was a simple life, but one I was content with. I had grown accustomed to my own company, though a deep, quiet part of me always yearned for a true family, a place where I was loved and seen not as an option, but as a priority. My relationship with my parents, David and Evelyn Miller, had always been complicated. I was their only daughter, yet I often felt like an outsider in my own home, a functional piece of furniture rather than a cherished child. My younger brother, Ben, 2 years my junior, was the undisputed golden child. Ben was a charismatic socialite, a professional fundraiser who orchestrated lavish charity galas for nonprofits. He was slick, charming, and a master at capturing the spotlight. My parents poured all their resources, all their admiration, into him. They were endlessly proud of his social standing, his ability to network with the city's elite. In their eyes, my career as a hardworking nurse was respectable, but ultimately unremarkable. It lacked the glamour and prestige of Ben's world. It was stable, quiet, and therefore invisible to them. I remember one time in high school, I won the state science fair with a project on improving hospital sanitation protocols. I'd poured months of my life into it, burning the midnight oil, driven by a genuine passion. When I came home, trophy and blue ribbon in hand, my parents barely glanced at it. "Oh, that's nice, dear," my mother had said, her attention already drifting. "But are you sure you want to spend your life in hospitals? Ben just made the planning committee for the school's fundraising ball. Now that's something that will really matter." That feeling of being utterly invisible, of my achievements being diminished, became the wallpaper of my childhood. No matter what I did, it was never enough. Never as dazzling as even the smallest of Ben's accomplishments. It was as if my successes were printed in black and white, while his were in glorious technicolor. This disparity only widened after I became a nurse. I frequently had to work holidays and special occasions. Instead of understanding, my parents saw it as an inconvenience. "Sarah, you have to work on Christmas again?" My mother would sigh. "Ben will be so disappointed you're not here." Or my father would say, "You know, your Aunt Martha will ask where you are." It makes us look bad. They never once considered the critical nature of my work, the lives I was helping to save. Their only concern was the family's public image. I became a functional, invisible utility for them, an ATM for loans that were never repaid, an errand runner for their endless needs. I was the first person they called for a favor, and the last person they thought of for a celebration. I was the family's designated fixer, the silent support system that allowed Ben's star to shine brighter. Ben, of course, thrived on this dynamic. He was constantly borrowing money from me for his ventures, which never seemed to materialize. I recall one incident vividly. He needed $5,000 for a charity event he claimed would be life-changing. I drained my savings account to help him, only to discover weeks later that he'd used the money for a luxury watch and a vacation to the Bahamas. When I confronted him, he just flashed his signature charming smile. "Sarah, you're the only one who gets me. I'll pay you back when the next project takes off." I was too exhausted to fight. The injustice had become so ingrained in me that I'd started to accept it as normal. It was easier to give in than to face the inevitable storm of their disapproval. I thought I could endure anything, but I had no idea that their next act would shatter every boundary I ever thought existed. It started on a Tuesday morning just like any other, or so I thought. I was driving to the hospital for my night shift, the city streets still dark and quiet. The radio was playing some soft rock station, and I was mentally running through my patient list for the night. In an instant, everything changed. A large truck, its headlights a blinding glare, ran a red light and slammed directly into the driver's side of my car. There was a deafening screech of metal, the explosive shatter of glass, and a wave of excruciating pain that felt like fire and ice all at once. Then, nothing but darkness. I awoke to a sharp, stabbing agony that seemed to radiate through every inch of my body. The harsh glare of fluorescent lights burned my eyes. The relentless, rhythmic beeping of machines filled the air, a symphony of crisis that I knew all too well from the other side of the bed. I felt the alien presence of a breathing tube down my throat, a violation that sent a wave of panic through me. Where was I? Why was I here? I tried to move, but my body felt leaden, pinned down by an invisible weight. A young nurse with a kind, worried face noticed my stirring and rushed to my side. "Sarah, you're awake. You're a nurse, so you know where you are, right? You were in a serious accident. We had to perform emergency surgery. You're in the ICU." I tried to form words, but no sound came out. She offered a reassuring smile. "Don't try to talk. You've been through a major ordeal. You have several broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and a concussion. But you're stable now. You're very lucky." Lucky? In that moment, all I felt was a profound sense of helplessness and pain. A few hours later, when I could communicate in weak whispers, I managed to ask about my family. "My parents?" I rasped, the words scratching my raw throat. The nurse's expression became hesitant. "We called them as soon as you were admitted. They came by for a little while this morning, but they had to leave." Leave? Why? How long had I been here? She explained that I had been in a medically induced coma for nearly 36 hours. My parents had come, but their visit had lasted no more than 15 minutes. They had spoken to my attending physician, Dr. Evans, and then they were gone. "They said they had an important event to attend," the nurse said softly. "Your brother's fundraising gala, wasn't it?" Ben's gala. The words echoed in my head like a siren. I had forgotten. Ben was hosting his biggest fundraising event of the year, an affair my parents had spent months preparing for, agonizing over everything from their outfits to the guest list. It was Ben's moment to shine in the city's high society, and nothing, not even their daughter hovering on the edge of death, could make them miss it. A different kind of pain, one that had nothing to do with my physical injuries, washed over me. This one hurt more than any broken bone. It was a cold, hollow ache in the center of my chest. Shortly after, Dr. Evans came to see me. He was a dedicated, no-nonsense physician I had worked alongside for years. He looked at me with deep sympathy in his eyes. "Sarah, I'm so relieved to see you awake. You were in critical condition, but you're responding well. You're a fighter. I managed a weak smile. Thank you, doctor. He rested a hand on my shoulder. About your parents. I'm sorry they couldn't be here with you now. I explained your condition to them, the severity of it, the importance of having family support, but they were insistent about the gala. I couldn't believe it. Dr. Evans was a man of immense professionalism, someone who never involved himself in the personal affairs of patients or staff. For him to voice his disapproval so openly told me that my parents' actions weren't just shocking to me, they were shocking to everyone. They had truly abandoned me. The physical agony now mingled with a bitter cocktail of humiliation, disappointment, and a rising tide of rage. I had always believed, naively perhaps, that in a true crisis, family would be your ultimate anchor. But it seemed, for my parents, that anchor had been replaced by the glittering chandeliers and polite applause of a ballroom. I could only hope that once the night was over, they would realize their mistake and return to my side. I had no idea that the gala was just the beginning of a nightmare that was about to get so much worse. The first few days in the ICU after waking were a brutal, lonely battle against pain and fear. The nurses and doctors were my only companions. They were my colleagues, my friends, and they cared for me not just with professional skill, but with genuine heart. They would sit and talk with me during their breaks, read passages from books, and even sneak me my favorite gelatin cups from the hospital cafeteria. They treated me like one of their own, like family. But I craved the comfort of a familiar face, the warmth of a family member's hand in mine. I waited. Every time the phone rang at the nurse's station, every footstep that paused outside my door, my heart would leap with hope. But it was never them. The first truly staggering blow came in the form of a video call from my parents, about 24 hours after I'd regained consciousness. I had braced myself, expecting a flood of worried questions and words of comfort. Instead, my mother's face appeared on the nurse's tablet, looking tired and slightly annoyed. Her hair was perfectly styled, remnants of the gala's glamour still clinging to her. "Sarah, you're awake? Thank God. Your father and I just got home from the gala. Ben did an absolutely spectacular job. He raised a record-breaking amount." She spoke with a breathless pride, as if recounting a historic victory. My father nodded in the background, his face etched with exhaustion but glowing with vicarious success. I searched their faces for any sign of concern for me, but all I saw was the reflected glory of Ben's triumph. "Mom, I whispered, my voice still weak. My mother cut me off. "Oh, don't you worry about a thing. You're a nurse. You know how to take care of yourself. It's Ben who needs our support right now. He's so stressed from the event. I need to make him a nourishing meal." My father chimed in. "You know how it is, Sarah. Ben's career is at a critical juncture. This is his moment. You just need to rest and recover." I felt a cold shock spread through me. I was in the ICU, my body shattered, and their primary concern was Ben's post-gala meal plan. The casualness of their neglect was what stunned me the most. A few days later, when I was finally stable enough to be moved from the ICU to a regular room, Ben made his grand entrance. He arrived with a bouquet of pale blue hydrangeas, a flower he knew I disliked. "Hey, big sis," he said, an insincere smile plastered on his face. "Sorry I couldn't get here sooner. The gala completely wiped me out. I was working 18-hour days. And you really had everyone worried. Mom had to tell her friends you were on a wellness retreat so it wouldn't cast a pall over my event." I stared at him, speechless. "I think you owe Mom an apology for making her lie," he added, his tone laced with accusation. A hot surge of anger, sharp and potent, rose in my chest. He hadn't asked how I was feeling. He hadn't shown a shred of remorse. His only concern was his reputation and my parents' social standing. I fought to keep my voice steady. Ben, do you have any idea how close I came to dying? He shrugged dismissively. Oh, you're a nurse. You know the drill. It was just a little fender bender. The important thing is that you didn't ruin my gala. I couldn't breathe. The casual cruelty of his words was suffocating. So, speaking of which, Ben continued seamlessly, could you do me a favor? I need some funds for a post-gala networking event. You know, to keep the momentum going. I figure you've got some savings tucked away. He hadn't even asked if I was out of pain yet. All I wanted was to hurl his stupid flowers across the room. The situation continued its downward spiral when my parents visited that weekend. They brought a box of chocolates I was allergic to and an old magazine. Feeling better, Sarah? My mother asked, her gaze sweeping over me without really seeing me. My father got straight to the point. We need to talk about these hospital bills. We can't be expected to cover all this. You do have insurance, don't you? I nodded numbly. I do. Good, he said, relieved. That settles that. Now Ben needs some help expanding his foundation. Maybe you could contribute a little something? They still saw me as a resource, a walking bank account, even as I lay broken in a hospital bed. I tried, one last time, to reach them. Mom, Dad, I almost died. All I want is for you to be here for me, to listen, to care about how I feel. Why does everything always have to be about Ben and money? My mother let out a dramatic sigh. Sarah, you're being overly sensitive again. You know Ben is the man of the family. He has greater responsibilities. You're a woman. A quiet, stable life is enough for you. My father nodded in solemn agreement. That's right. You have a good job, a nice apartment. What more could you want? A profound despair settled over me. They would never understand. They never wanted to. One of my colleagues, a senior nurse named Jessica, had witnessed these interactions. Jessica was a dear friend, tough but incredibly kind. One evening, as she was changing my dressings, she spoke to me, her voice heavy with concern. Sarah, I've seen how your parents and brother are treating you. This isn't healthy. You deserve to be cherished and supported, not used as an emotional and financial punching bag. Jessica's words were a life raft in a sea of emotional abuse. She validated everything I was feeling. I wasn't being overly sensitive. I was being mistreated. The doctors and other nurses have noticed too, she added quietly. They're appalled by your family's behavior. We've been documenting everything. That surprised me. The thought that strangers, my professional peers, cared more about my well-being than my own blood relatives was both comforting and heartbreaking. I thought I had hit rock bottom. I thought I could absorb this pain, this neglect, and somehow survive. But I had no idea that an act of cruelty, even more profound, was waiting just around the corner. An act that would force me to choose between my lifelong role as the dutiful daughter and my own survival. After weeks that felt like a lifetime, I was finally deemed well enough for discharge, but my recovery was far from over. I faced months of physical therapy, constant fatigue, and, most importantly, the need for emotional support as I healed. I held on to a fragile sliver of hope that, away from the sterile environment of the hospital, my parents would finally step up. I imagined them helping me settle in at home, making sure I was comfortable. The reality was a brutal, empty silence. When I arrived at my apartment, the driver helping me to the door, I found it completely deserted. On the kitchen counter, a single piece of paper was propped against the salt shaker. A note. Sarah, it read, in my mother's neat cursive. Glad to hear you've been discharged. Your father, Ben, and I have gone on a much-needed vacation to Hawaii. Ben arranged it all as a thank you for our support with the gala. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Take care of yourself. There's some soup in the freezer. I read the note again, and then a third time, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. A vacation. They had gone on a luxury vacation. They had left me, alone, fragile, fresh out of the hospital after a life-threatening ordeal, to fend for myself. There was no one to help me up the stairs, no one to bring me a glass of water, no one to just sit with me in the deafening silence. It was the ultimate act of abandonment, a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical blow, reopening all my wounds. I had dedicated my entire life to them, always being there in their moments of need. But in my darkest hour, they had chosen a beach in Hawaii over their own daughter. The silence in my apartment was overwhelming. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator, seemed to mock my solitude. The next day, my phone rang. It was my father. "Sarah, are you home? Are you okay?" His voice held a note of feigned concern that made my stomach churn. "I'm home, Dad," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Where are you?" "We're in Hawaii," he said cheerfully. "Ben booked us this incredible trip after the Gala's success. Your brother is so thoughtful." You know, thoughtful? The word was so absurd I almost laughed. Thoughtful enough to abandon his sister right after she gets out of the hospital? My father sighed, the sound of a man burdened by my supposed drama. "Sarah, you're being sensitive again. You know Ben has important connections to maintain. We couldn't pass up this opportunity to help him. You're a nurse. You know how to take care of yourself." I couldn't hold it in any longer. The dam of forced composure I had built for years finally broke. "I almost died," I screamed into the phone, the sound raw and painful. "I needed you here. Not in Hawaii." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then, his voice, cold and sharp, cut through me. "All right, that's enough. We'll be home when we're home. Stop making a scene. It will reflect poorly on Ben's reputation." The casual cruelty of that final statement broke me. My pain, my fear, my near-death experience, all of it was secondary to Ben's public image. I slammed the phone down, my hand shaking. The tears came then, hot and furious. I was more alone than I had ever been in my life. All my years of trying to earn their love and approval had been for nothing. I had been a fool. I had endured. I had sacrificed. I had given every piece of myself away. And for what? To be left alone in an empty apartment while they toasted my brother's success on a tropical island. The endurance was gone. The hope was gone. All that was left was a cold, hard clarity. That night, my world spinning with rage and grief, I called Jessica. I told her everything, my voice breaking as I recounted the note, the phone call. She listened patiently, without interruption. When I finished, there was a quiet pause before she spoke, her voice firm and clear. "Sarah, you have to do something. You cannot let them treat you like this anymore. You deserve so much better." Her words were the spark in the darkness. She was right. I couldn't be a victim any longer. It was time to fight back. I had spent my career saving other people's lives. Now, it was time to save my own. I had no idea that in my moment of absolute weakness, an unexpected door was about to open, revealing an advantage I never knew I had. An advantage that would change everything. When Jessica had mentioned that the doctors and nurses had witnessed my family's behavior, it had been a flicker of validation. Now, it became a beacon of hope. I wasn't alone in this. I had allies, professional, credible allies who had been by my side when my own family was 1,000 miles away. The very next morning, my resolve solidified. I called Dr. Evans and requested a meeting. He agreed without hesitation. When I walked into his office, he was waiting for me, his expression a mixture of professional concern and personal empathy. "Sarah, I'm glad you called," he said, gesturing for me to sit. I have been deeply disturbed by how your parents handled this situation. I've seen countless families navigate the stress of the ICU, but I have never witnessed such blatant neglect. I took a deep, steadying breath. Doctor, I want to do something about it. I can't let this go. I need them to face the consequences of their actions. Dr. Evans nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. I agree, and I believe you have more than enough grounds to do so. He then proceeded to lay out the full extent of what he and his team had observed and documented. From the moment you were admitted, we started a detailed record. We called your parents. They arrived, stayed for approximately 15 minutes, and spent most of that time not at your bedside, but asking me about the prognosis in the context of Ben's Gala. They explicitly asked if we could keep your admission quiet so as not to disrupt the event. I was stunned. I informed them that your condition was critical and that you required the emotional support of your family. Their response was that they had, and I quote, more significant social obligations. My heart hammered in my chest, a painful rhythm of validation and renewed hurt. It wasn't just me, Dr. Evans continued. The entire ICU nursing staff witnessed it. They charted every single interaction or lack thereof. They logged the times your parents visited, which were few and far between. They even logged a call from your brother, Ben, where his primary concern was not your condition, but whether news of your accident would leak and negatively impact his gala's attendance. I couldn't believe the level of detail. They had recorded everything. This was it. This was my secret weapon. Dr. Evans looked at me, his expression resolute. Sarah, we, the medical professionals who cared for you, are appalled. We are willing to testify on your behalf. We can provide all the official records, the nursing notes, the visitor logs. We are prepared to go to court and state, under oath, what we witnessed. You deserve justice. His words were a powerful current, washing away the years of self-doubt. I wasn't alone. I had a team of highly respected professionals, unimpeachable witnesses, who had seen the truth and were willing to stand with me. Armed with this new knowledge and a surge of empowerment, I contacted a lawyer specializing in family law and personal injury, a woman named Elizabeth Harding. Miss Harding had a reputation for being a shark in the courtroom, brilliant and relentless. When I sat in her office and recounted my story, she listened intently, her sharp eyes missing nothing. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. Sarah, she said, her voice calm but firm, this is an exceptionally strong case. We have clear, documented evidence of negligence, emotional distress, and abandonment. And most importantly, we have expert witnesses, the medical staff who cared for you. Miss Harding laid out a clear, strategic plan. First, we will send a formal demand letter to your parents, outlining our claim for emotional damages and seeking compensation for any medical costs not covered by your insurance, which you incurred due to their neglect. If they refuse to settle, we will file a lawsuit. With the testimony of the doctors and nurses, our chances of winning are extremely high. A new kind of strength filled me. I was no longer Sarah, the broken patient. I was Sarah, the plaintiff, a warrior ready for battle. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had one chance to turn the tables, one chance to reclaim my life, and I was not going to fail. I had spent my life saving others. Now, it was time to save myself. They would not get away with this. Not this time. As Miss Harding predicted, my parents' initial reaction to the legal demand letter was dismissive, followed quickly by indignant rage. They ignored the formal letter from my lawyer. Then, the phone calls started, filled with accusations and emotional manipulation. "What in the world are you doing, Sarah?" my mother shrieked through the phone. "You're trying to ruin this family's reputation. Do you have any idea how hard Ben worked for that gala?" I hung up without a word. I knew then that talking was useless. They needed to be shown. not told. Miss Harding arranged for a formal mediation session at the local courthouse, a final attempt at a resolution before filing a full-blown lawsuit. It was the perfect stage for the confrontation I needed, a neutral ground where they would be forced to listen to the truth without the comfort of their own home to hide in. I steeled myself for war. On the day of the mediation, I arrived at the courthouse with Miss Harding by my side. Dr. Evans was there, as promised. So were Jessica and two other nurses from the ICU team, their presence a silent, powerful statement of support. I looked at them, my heart filled with a gratitude so immense it almost brought me to tears. They were my real family now. As I walked into the mediation room, I saw my parents and Ben already seated. Their faces were masks of annoyance and arrogance. Ben was casually scrolling through his phone, as if this were a minor inconvenience in his very important day. They had no idea what was coming. They still thought I was just being dramatic. Miss Harding began the session, her voice crisp and professional as she laid out the case, detailing the timeline of my accident, my critical condition, and my family's subsequent abandonment. Then, it was time for the witnesses. Dr. Evans was first. He walked to the head of the table, his demeanor calm and authoritative. "My name is Dr. Marcus Evans," he began. "I am the chief of critical care at Street, Jude's hospital, and I was Miss Sarah Miller's attending physician." He recounted the events with clinical precision. He described my life-threatening injuries, the emergency surgery, and then the 15-minute visit from my parents. He detailed their primary concern being not my survival, but the potential disruption to Ben's Gala. He told the mediator how they had asked him to keep things quiet. I informed them. "Doctor," Evans stated, his eyes fixed on my parents, "that Miss Miller's condition was precarious, and that family support was crucial." Their response was that they had, and I quote, "more significant social obligations." A stunned silence fell over the room. The color drained from my parents' faces. Ben finally looked up from his phone. They couldn't deny the words of a respected chief of medicine. Next came Jessica and the other nurses. One by one, they presented their detailed, time-stamped notes. They spoke of my parents' complaints about being bothered by calls from the hospital. They recounted Ben's phone call, where he expressed more anxiety about the Gala's PR than my prognosis. Their testimony was delivered without emotion, a cold, factual account that was more damning than any angry accusation could ever be. When it was their turn to speak, my parents and Ben scrambled for excuses. They tried to paint me as oversensitive, as exaggerating. "We love our daughter," my mother said, her voice trembling with false emotion. "We were just trying to support our son's career," Ben added, his voice dripping with condescension. "She's always been jealous of my success. This is just her way of trying to sabotage me." But their pathetic justifications crumbled under the mountain of evidence. Miss Harding presented the official hospital visitor logs, showing their minimal presence, the nurses' meticulous charts, and even the hospital's legally recorded phone calls for quality assurance purposes. My parents and Ben were trapped. Their lies were exposed, their narrative shattered. They had nowhere left to run. Finally, it was my turn. I stood up, my gaze locking with my parents, then with Ben. "I used to think family was everything," I said, my voice steady and strong. "I used to believe that no matter what happened, you would be there for me. But you weren't. You abandoned me. You saw me not as your daughter, not as your sister, but as an inconvenience, a financial resource. I will not be that person for you anymore." I looked at the mediator, then back at them. "I am no longer asking for your support, emotionally or financially, and I will no longer be providing any to you. From this day forward, I am on my own. I will build my own life, and I will build my own family, a real family, one built on love and respect." The room was silent. My parents and Ben stared at me, their expressions a mixture of shock, regret, and a flicker of their old anger. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of their anger. I had taken back my power. I had stood up for myself. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I had just made the single most important decision of my life. The confrontation in that sterile, airless mediation room sent shockwaves not just through the foundation of my family, but through the very core of my own being. Leaving that courthouse felt like stepping out of a suffocating fog into the sharp, blinding sunlight. The air tasted different, cleaner. For the first time in my life, I hadn't backed down. I hadn't smoothed things over. I hadn't swallowed my pain to maintain a fragile, artificial peace. I had spoken my truth, armed with irrefutable facts, and the silence that followed from my parents and brother was more telling than any shouted denial could ever be. They were utterly defeated, not by legal maneuvering, but by the cold, hard weight of their own actions being held up for them to see. They couldn't comprehend that I, their sensitive, dutiful daughter, the family's designated shock absorber, had orchestrated such a definitive and public reckoning. Following the session, Miss Harding, with the cool precision of a surgeon, negotiated the final settlement. I was adamant that this was not about financial revenge. I didn't want a fortune from them. Taking their money would have felt like another kind of entanglement, another chain binding me to them. I only wanted what was just, my uncovered medical expenses paid in full, and a modest sum for the emotional distress and the terrifying solitude I had endured. The most crucial part of the agreement, however, was non-monetary. It was a legally binding clause drafted by Miss Harding with ironclad language, stipulating that they were to issue a formal, written apology to me and, more importantly, to cease all unsolicited contact and interference in my life. It was, in essence, a legal restraining order for my peace of mind. Reluctantly, their faces a mixture of humiliation and disbelief, they signed. The stroke of their pens on that paper felt like the snapping of chains I had been dragging my entire life. The day the settlement was finalized was the day I truly began to build my new dawn. My first act of liberation was to move out of my old apartment. It was a perfectly nice place, but it was haunted by the ghosts of my old life, the phone calls I'd taken while pacing the floor, the nights I'd spent waiting for them to show up, the note left on the kitchen counter that had shattered my world. It was a space that had been defined by my relationship to them. With the help of Jessica and a few other nurses, who showed up with pizza, boxes, and an abundance of laughter, I packed up my life. We worked with a joyful, chaotic energy, turning what could have been a sad farewell into a celebratory exorcism. I found a new place, a little smaller, but it felt infinitely larger because it was entirely mine. It was a second-floor apartment in a neighborhood I'd always loved, with a large bay window in the living room that flooded the space with afternoon sunlight. It was a fresh start, a blank canvas where I could paint a new life, free from the shadows of their judgment and manipulation. The feeling of liberation was intoxicating, a breath of fresh, clean air after a lifetime of suffocation. For so many years, I had contorted myself to fit their expectations, to earn their approval. Now, I realized I never needed it. In fact, it had been a poison. I was finally, blessedly free. Those first few weeks were a delicate dance of healing and rediscovery. My body was still mending. I had physical therapy appointments 3 times a week to regain strength and mobility in my left side. The emotional toll was immense, and it came in waves. Some days, I would wake up feeling powerful and light, marveling at my newfound freedom. Other days, a profound sadness would wash over me, a grief for the family I had lost, or more accurately, the family I had finally admitted to myself that I had never truly had. But the crucial difference was this: I was not alone. Jessica and the other nurses became my unwavering support system, my chosen family. They created a meal train for me for the first 2 weeks, so I never had to worry about cooking. They would show up after their shifts, sometimes just to sit with me and watch a movie. Their quiet, comfortable presence, a balm to my raw nerves. They didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. They simply showed up. They listened when I needed to talk, and they sat in silence with me when I didn't. They were my proof that love didn't have to be conditional, that family could be a bond forged in shared experience and mutual respect, not just shared DNA. Doc Evans, too, became a steadfast friend. He would call regularly, not to discuss my medical progress, but just to check in, to ask how I was really doing. He told me that my courage had sparked conversations among the hospital staff about patient advocacy and the importance of recognizing emotional neglect as a critical part of a patient's story. I had, in my own small way, made a difference. Meanwhile, the consequences of my parents' and Ben's actions began to ripple through the carefully curated world they held so dear. The justice I sought wasn't just for me. It was the natural, unavoidable karmic balance of their choices. News of the mediation and settlement, though handled discreetly by Miss Harding, inevitably leaked. Our city's high society is a small, insular world, and secrets have a short shelf life. The story of Ben's Gala, once a shining testament to his success, was now irrevocably tarnished with the ugly truth of their neglect. Whispers followed them at the country club. My parents' friends began to ask pointed, uncomfortable questions. We were so worried when we heard about Sarah's accident. They'd say, their eyes sharp with curiosity, "You must have been beside yourselves." The lie my mother had told about my wellness retreat unraveled, exposing them not just as neglectful parents, but as dishonest social climbers. Ben's donors, the lifeblood of his entire enterprise, started to pull back. These were savvy business people. They didn't want their company names associated with a family scandal. Their carefully constructed public image began to crumble, brick by painful brick. I heard through the grapevine, via a cousin who was both horrified and secretly pleased by the drama, that Ben had to cancel several high-profile events due to unforeseen circumstances. My parents were facing a cold shoulder from people they once considered their closest allies. They had lost the one thing they valued more than anything, their reputation. Their currency of social capital was gone. I felt a strange, detached sadness watching their world implode from a distance. There was no joy, no sense of victory, only a quiet, profound sense of justice. It was the universe rebalancing itself. They had chosen image over substance, prestige over people, and their son over their daughter. Now, they were left with the hollow echo of their choices. I had naively hoped that this public humiliation might be the catalyst for genuine change, that it might force them to finally look inward. But I was beginning to understand a difficult truth. Some people are so deeply entrenched in their own narratives of victimhood and entitlement that they are incapable of change. They would not see this as the consequence of their actions, but as another wound inflicted upon them by their ungrateful daughter. The thought was no longer painful, just clarifying. My new dawn was rising, but their sun, it seemed, had already set. 18 months have passed since the day I reclaimed my life in that cold, formal mediation room. It feels like a different lifetime, belonging to a different woman. The world I inhabit today is unrecognizable from the one I left behind, transformed in the best, most profound ways imaginable. I am fully recovered from the accident, not just healed, but rebuilt. The physical scars have faded to pale, silvery lines, but the emotional scars have transformed into something else entirely, a source of quiet strength, a constant reminder of the resilience I never knew I possessed. I am not just surviving, I am thriving. My return to Street Jude's was not just a return to a job, but a homecoming to myself. I walked through those familiar corridors, not as the quiet, accommodating Sarah who would shrink herself to make others comfortable, but as Sarah Miller, a woman who had found her voice and wasn't afraid to let it be heard. My colleagues noticed the change immediately. My suggestions in meetings were firmer, my advocacy for my patients more relentless, my boundaries with difficult families clearer and unshakable. This newfound confidence, born from the crucible of betrayal, did not go unnoticed by the hospital administration. 6 months ago, I was promoted to head nurse of the ICU. It was the culmination of years of hard work, a dream I had quietly held but never dared to voice too loudly, lest it be seen as too ambitious. Now, I embraced it. I lead my team with the same compassion I've always had, but now it's tempered with the wisdom that you cannot pour from an empty cup. I make sure my nurses take their breaks, that they have support, that their own well-being is a priority lessons I had to learn in the most brutal way possible. With a significant salary increase and a more stable schedule, I was finally able to do something that had always felt like a distant fantasy. I bought a house. It's not a mansion, not a sprawling estate like the ones Ben used to covet for his gallows. It's a small, charming bungalow on a tree-lined street, with a little backyard garden and a front porch perfect for a rocking chair. The moment I turned the key in the lock for the first time, a wave of emotion so powerful washed over me that I had to lean against the doorframe for support. This was mine, not a temporary shelter granted by resentful parents, but a sanctuary I had built for myself. I painted the walls in warm, calming shades of sage green and soft cream. I filled every corner with books, plants, and art that made my soul sing. It is a space that reflects who I am, where I feel safe, cherished, and, most importantly, where I finally, truly belong. My chosen family, my sisterhood of nurses, has become the bedrock of my life. Our bond, forged in the high-stakes environment of the ICU, has deepened into something unbreakable. We have a standing Taco Tuesday at my house every other week. We've taken weekend trips to the coast, laughing until our sides ached as we watched the waves crash against the rocks. When I was agonizing over which house to buy, Jessica was the one who came to every open house, meticulously checking for foundational cracks and leaky faucets. They were there for the housewarming, filling my new home with laughter, love, and a ridiculous number of houseplants. They are the family that chose me back, the ones who loved and supported me unconditionally, asking for nothing in return but my happiness. And then there's Michael. I met him about a year ago at a hospital charity event, a small, intimate affair. Nothing like Ben's ostentatious galas. He's a cardiac surgeon at Street Jude's, and I was immediately drawn to his quiet intelligence and the kindness in his eyes. We started talking, and it was easy, effortless. He asked me about my work, my passions, my life, and he actually listened. Our first date was a simple walk along the river, followed by coffee. I was terrified. I was carrying so much baggage, so much trauma. I was sure that the moment I revealed the fractured mess of my family life, he would run. One evening, a few weeks into our relationship, I sat him down on my new sofa and told him everything. I didn't spare any details: the accident, the ICU, the gala, the vacation, the lawsuit. I spoke for nearly an hour, my voice sometimes trembling, expecting to see judgment or disbelief in his eyes. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then, he reached out, took my hand, and simply said, "I am so sorry you had to go through that alone. No one should ever be made to feel that way by the people who are supposed to love them the most." There was no judgment, no disbelief, just pure, unadulterated empathy. He loves me, for me, for the woman I am today, scars and all. He respects my boundaries with my family, never pushing me to reconcile, but always offering to be a quiet presence of support if I need him. We are building a relationship founded on mutual respect, trust, and a deep, genuine affection that feels more real than anything I've ever known. As for my former family, life has not been as kind. The justice I sought wasn't just in the settlement check. It was in the natural, unavoidable consequences of their actions. The social fallout from the lawsuit was permanent and devastating for them. In the small, interconnected world of our city's elite, reputation is currency, and theirs was now bankrupt. They became pariahs. The invitations to the parties and charity boards that had been the center of my mother's universe dried up. My father, who prided himself on his business connections, found old colleagues suddenly too busy for lunch. They were ostracized, not with loud confrontations, but with the quiet, chilling silence of social exclusion. Ben's career, a fragile structure built on image and my parents' money, imploded spectacularly. Without the sheen of a perfect family image, his brand of philanthropy was exposed for what it was: vapid self-promotion. Donors, now aware of the story behind the story, lost confidence. I heard from a gossipy cousin that his last attempt at a gala was a dismal failure. The grand ballroom was half empty. The auction items went for a fraction of their value, and the event ended up losing money. He had to dissolve his foundation, sell his flashy car, and move into a smaller apartment. He is now struggling to make ends meet, a harsh reality for a man who had always lived off the generosity and sacrifice of others, primarily me. My parents have tried to breach the wall I've built around my life a few times. The texts still come sporadically, filled with vague platitudes like "thinking of you" or "we really should talk," but never, not once, the words "I am sorry." I maintain my boundaries with a calm firmness that would have been impossible for the old Sarah. I respond politely but distantly, making it clear that my life is full and my time is precious. I agreed to see them last Christmas. I hosted it at my house, on my terms. I invited Jessica and Michael, my human shields, my chosen family. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. My mother kept commenting on how cozy my house was, a backhanded compliment that I chose to ignore. My father tried to give me unsolicited financial advice. Ben was sullen and resentful, barely making eye contact. The entire evening was a performance of strained civility, but it was a victory for me. I was in control. I was safe. Then, one sunny afternoon a few months ago, my mother showed up at my new house unannounced. My heart leaped into my throat, an old reflex of anxiety. I almost didn't open the door, but I took a deep breath and did. She looked older, more tired than I had ever seen her. The fight had gone out of her eyes. She didn't try to guilt me or manipulate me. She just stood on my porch for a moment, looking at the blooming roses in my garden. "You have a beautiful home, Sarah," she said quietly. I let her in, and we sat in my sun-filled living room. She looked around, at the photos of my friends on the mantelpiece, at the half-finished painting on my easel. "You've done so well," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Your father and we were wrong. I was wrong." And then, the words I had spent my entire life yearning to hear, words I had long given up on. "I'm proud of you." A lump formed in my throat. The one 6-year-old girl inside me, the one with the science fair trophy, wanted to weep. But the 3 8-year-old woman I had become simply smiled, a real, genuine smile, free of bitterness. "Thank you, Mom," I said. "I'm proud of myself, too." It wasn't a magical absolution. It didn't erase the years of pain or the deep scars of their abandonment. But it was a crack of light in a door that had been sealed shut for so long. It was a start. I know the road to a different kind of relationship with them, if one is even possible, is long and uncertain. But for the first time, I felt I had the strength to walk it, at my own pace, on my own terms. I finally understood what it meant to be truly home, not in a house, but within myself. Looking back on this incredible, tumultuous journey, from the sterile, beeping confines of an ICU bed to the vibrant, sun-drenched peace of my own backyard, I've come to understand some profound truths. These aren't lessons you learn in a book or a classroom. They are the kind of wisdom that is forged in fire, the kind that reshapes the very core of who you are. The most important lesson, the one that echoes in my quietest moments, is that your self-worth is never, ever determined by the valuation others place upon you. For so long, I had allowed my family's perception of me to be my reality. I was Sarah the nurse, Sarah the helper, Sarah the reliable one. I was a supporting character in their story, my own needs and dreams relegated to the background. I spent a lifetime contorting myself into a shape that I thought would finally be worthy of their love and approval, shrinking myself to make them feel bigger, silencing my own voice so theirs could be heard more clearly. I thought their validation was the air I needed to breathe, but I was profoundly wrong. The air I truly needed was the clean, crisp air of self-respect. Lying in that hospital bed, abandoned and alone, was the most painful and yet the most liberating moment of my life, because it was the moment I was finally forced to breathe on my own. I learned that setting boundaries isn't a selfish act of aggression. It is a sacred act of self-preservation. For years, I viewed boundaries as walls that kept people out. Now I understand that healthy boundaries are not walls, but fences with gates. They don't exist to isolate you. They exist to protect the beautiful, sacred garden of your own well-being. They allow you to choose who you let in, who you trust with your vulnerability, and who needs to be loved from a safe distance. Walking away from the toxic dynamic of my family was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. It felt like tearing a part of myself away. There was grief, a deep and aching grief for the family I wished I had, for the love I was never given in the way I needed. But that painful surgery was necessary to remove a sickness that was slowly poisoning my soul. And in the space that was left behind, something new and beautiful began to grow. I found peace. I found freedom. And I found a real family. A family not bound by blood or obligation, but woven together by the threads of mutual respect, genuine care, and unconditional support. And I learned that justice, true justice, isn't always about a judge's gavel or a legal victory, though those things can be powerful tools. True justice is the quiet, unshakable peace that comes from knowing you have honored yourself. It's the moment you look in the mirror and see not a victim, but a survivor, a warrior who fought for her own soul and won. The doctors and nurses who stood with me, my incredible team of allies, they didn't just testify to a set of facts. They testified to a fundamental human decency. They saw an injustice, a violation of the sacred trust between a family and a child in need, and they refused to be silent bystanders. They reminded me that for every act of cruelty and selfishness in the world, there is a countervailing force of compassion and integrity. They showed me that there is profound goodness in the world, people who will stand in your corner, not because they have to, but because it is the right thing to do. They became my lifeline, my proof that I was worthy of being fought for. Perhaps the most complex lesson has been about forgiveness. For a long time, I thought forgiveness meant wiping the slate clean, pretending the hurt never happened, and welcoming people back into your life without question. I thought it meant I had to find a way to excuse their behavior, to understand their motives to the point of exonerating them. But I've come to learn that forgiveness is not about them. It's about me. It's about releasing the anger and resentment that binds you to the past. It's about accepting that you cannot change what happened, but you can change the power it has over you. I have forgiven my parents and my brother. I have forgiven them for not being the family I needed them to be. But forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. It does not mean amnesia. It does not mean I will ever allow myself to be put back in a position where I can be so deeply wounded again. My forgiveness is for me. It is the key that unlocked my own cage. My boundaries are also for me. They are the walls of the new, safe home I have built for my heart. The two can and must coexist. My mother's quiet apology on my porch was a profound moment, not because it erased the past, but because it acknowledged it. It was a crack of light in a door that had been sealed shut by years of denial. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes, when you change, you give the people around you the opportunity to change as well. Whether they take that opportunity is up to them. My father is still struggling. Ben is still lost in his own world of resentment. I cannot fix them. I cannot save them. That is not my job anymore. My only job is to continue to cultivate my own garden, to nurture my own happiness, and to be a source of light and support for the people who have shown me what true love really island. So I ask you, the person watching this right now, have you ever had to face a painful betrayal from the very people who were supposed to protect you? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? How did you find the strength to move forward, to reclaim your own narrative? What lessons has your own journey taught you about resilience, boundaries, and the true meaning of family? Please, if you feel comfortable, share your story in the comments below. Your words might just be the lifeline that someone else needs to hear today, the proof that they are not alone. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something in your heart, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that their value is not defined by their utility to others, or by the roles they are expected to play. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it is okay to put yourself first, to protect your peace, and to demand the respect you so richly deserve. Thank you for listening to my story, for bearing witness to my journey. And please, remember this: you are worthy of love. You are worthy of respect, and you are worthy of a life filled with joy and peace, on your own terms. Have the courage to stand up for yourself, to speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. It is the most powerful sound you will ever make.